Fraternidad Ifa de las Américas, podcast dimensional.
Hola a todos, les envío un cordial saludo. Soy Heriberto Molina Olbordica y les doy la bienvenida a su otro episodio de su podcast dimensional de la Fraternidad Ifa de las Américas. Es un honor contar con su presencia en este espacio donde seguimos nutriendo y aprendiendo sobre nuestra tradición y el sistema de Ifa y mucho más. Si deseas ponerte en contacto con los miembros de la fraternidad, puedes escribirnos a través del WhatsApp +1 786 328 8945 o enviarnos un correo electrónico a info@ifadelasaméricas.com. También puedes seguirnos en nuestras redes sociales, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify por @Ifa de las Américas, donde encontrarás contenido valioso y actualizaciones sobre todos nuestros episodios. Además, te invito a que visites nuestra website para leer artículos muy interesantes escritos por miembros destacados de nuestra fraternidad, como el hermano Rafael Molina Ifasemú y el mayor Leonel Gámez Ochenibu. Excelentes artículos, excelente contenido. Los invito para que puedan profundizar en el conocimiento de Ifa y expandir tu perspectiva sobre nuestra espiritualidad. Realmente te lo recomiendo. El día de hoy nos sentimos honrados con la visita de el señor David Wilson, Awo Falokun Fatunmbi. Él nos acompaña. Vamos a tener una conversación sobre la psicología en Ifa. Sabemos que la psicología es una ciencia que estudia el comportamiento humano y los procesos mentales como pensamiento, emociones, percepciones y aprendizajes. Su objetivo es comprender cómo las personas sienten, piensan, actúan e interactúan, tanto a nivel individual como en grupos. Esta disciplina se apoya en métodos científicos y abarca distintas áreas como psicología clínica, psicología cognitiva, psicología social, psicología del desarrollo, psicología educativa y por ahí otras vertientes. En esta ocasión, la comprensión del comportamiento y el carácter Iwa tiene que ver mucho con la parte psicológica. En Ifa el concepto de Iwa Kwele, buen carácter, es fundamental. Un sacerdote debe conocer profundamente el comportamiento humano para guiar al consultante hacia una vida equilibrada y ética. Esto coincide con la psicología en cuanto al desarrollo personal, la autorreflexión y el autocontrol. Acompáñanos en este episodio para que Awo Falokun nos enseñe su punto de vista de Ifa en la psicología. Bienvenido, Awo.
Agboato, Chevrolet, bueno. Muchas gracias para video, es muy felicidad para mí. Gracias. So tonight we're going to talk about Ifa psychology. Let me start by saying I wrote a book on this subject called Ori. And that as I wrote the book and found words used in Odu to describe Ifa psychology, I find that Ifa psychology is much more in-depth, thorough, and connected to reality than normal Western psychology. I was just going to say, I found the words difficult to translate because many of the psychological concepts described in Ifa don't have an English equivalent.
Ok, Awo Falokun, la primera pregunta que te quiero hacer, bajo tu punto de vista, en tu praxis, ¿de qué manera las consultas de Ifa funcionan como una forma de acompañamiento terapéutico o emocional?
Yes, let's start with this. That's a big topic because in the diaspora there's a lot of ideas that are not consistent with the idea of divination as it's understood in Africa. So there's a huge amount of confusion over this question. So I'm going to start with the fundamental principles of divination from an African point of view, and we'll begin to see the differences and I think begin to have enough information to choose which system we want to use. So the first point is that Ifa divination is a problem-solving discipline and not a fortune-telling discipline. It does not predict future events. It explains how to solve a problem, and then it tells what the consequence of solving that problem is, which, if you follow the advice, can look like fortune-telling, but it's just the logical consequence of a particular set of actions. So Ifa divination is a problem-solving tool, but it's also a teaching tool. It teaches a person how to fix their own problems through the expansion of their own consciousness. Now, on the first level of fixing a problem, we want to integrate the right brain, left brain, so we can access all the wisdom from our own personal life experience. If we're stuck in the right brain or stuck in the right brain, we have a focus that blocks any perception of the bigger picture. God teaches that life is designed to work, and that Ifa is a record of ancestral wisdom that gives us guidance on how to fix a problem and how to do it by maintaining Iwa Pele, or good character. So we first try to fix a problem with just practical common sense. When that doesn't work, we have mechanisms for speaking to the ancestors for guidance. If that doesn't work, we speak to the Orishas for guidance. And if that doesn't work, we speak to the spirit of Ela for guidance. So, just go there, Ashe. So there's in order to understand this process, I like to share an idea that was developed by a Western physicist named David Bohm. And he did studies that show that everything in creation has consciousness. He made this discovery while studying plasma clouds when he was working on the Manhattan Project, developing the atom bomb for the United States. He did an experiment that proved plasma clouds had consciousness, and when he shared the results of his experiments, he was fired from the program, and he was deported from the United States, and the other scientists that he was working with got really upset. Here's the point. David Bohm was right that everything in creation has consciousness, but what he didn't understand, which makes Ifa such a effective system, is not only does nature have consciousness, but that we can communicate with nature and we can get solutions to problems that are outside our limited human experience. Ifa also teaches that we have the ability to communicate with our inner self, with our ancestors, Orisha, and the spirit of Ela, and the discipline for learning how to do that involves the development of good character, or Iwa Pele. If a person is stuck in their greed, if a person is stuck in their need to control others, if a person is stuck in their fear of what might happen next during the day, that fear splits the right brain and the left brain, and it also splits the head and the heart. And once that split occurs, there's no communication with spirit. So Ifa psychology is really about the ability to maintain the link with the self and the higher self, the self and the inner self, and with that link, be able to communicate with spiritual forces that have information outside of our own limited human experience. And Ifa is very, very clear that the only road to do that is through the development of good character. You can't maintain inner peace and inner balance if you indulge in lying. You cannot maintain balance if you indulge in stealing, if you're abusive towards other people, if you engage in violence or extensive criminal activity. All of those things restrict our ability to fully integrate the elements of Ori, and the integration of Ori is the whole point of Ifa psychology.
Baba Falokun, ¿puedes compartir algún ejemplo donde un Odu Ifa haya revelado patrones emocionales o mentales inconscientes que están afectados de forma negativa y debe el sacerdote implementar esta ayuda psicológica a través de Ifa? ¿Puedes compartir algún ejemplo de algún Odu que hable sobre personas que presenten problemas mentales psicológicos que no sean espirituales, sino que sea en su cabeza, y entonces el babalao tenga que aplicar la medicina psicológica?
Yeah, listen, I would argue that they all do that, number one, but some are more clear than others. The process of using Odu as a tool for expanding consciousness is a culturally understood shared belief in a specific system, because everybody in the culture understands that and shares that belief. There's no need in Africa to explain what to traditional Africans is obvious. But once the tradition leaves its cultural context, then it needs to be explained, and that explanation, as it appears in verses, is sometimes a bit abstract, but there are clear examples. The clearest example is Iwori Ogbe, which lays out the principles for developing good character, and as a result, the principles for solving any internal emotional conflict. The first principle of Ifa psychology is never blame anybody for any of your problems ever. Okay? The second principle, and so people say when they hear that, but I'm being hexed, people are hexing me. No, Ifa teaches that hexing is a result of personal jealousy and the need to control others. Ifa teaches to align yourself with your destiny, and if you're aligned with your destiny, you're aligned with God's will, and in the battle between God's will and human will, God always wins. So as long as you keep your focus on developing your Iwapwele in conformity with your destiny, in conformity with God's will, nobody can have a negative effect on you through hexing, juju, or negativity of any kind.
La siguiente pregunta, Baba Falokun, desde tu punto de vista, ¿cómo actúan los rituales, Ebo, Adimu, iniciaciones, como mecanismo de sanación o liberación emocional?
That's a good question. All right, so if we take the idea that Ifa is telling us to take responsibility for all our problems, that does not mean that I'm saying racism, sexism, and homophobia are not destructive social attitudes. What I'm saying is we can choose how we relate to those ideas. That's an element of choice for us. And so, because we live in a universe in which free will is an element of creation, we can choose how we respond to things that happen to us. We can look for others to blame, which is a version of the devil made me do it, which is total nonsense. Or we can look for ways to deal with problems that allow us to maintain our own sense of inner peace and our own sense of being centered. So the first thing to understand in terms of making a bow as it relates to the idea of expanding our consciousness and create a healthy psychological foundation for how we see the world. The first thing is there's only one form of EB. In the diaspora, they have EB from Orisha, EB from ancestors, EB from Ifa. No. See, all of that implies that the Orishas or the ancestors are mad at you. And that's not true ever. The Orishas do what they need to do, and they are there for you to learn from, but they don't get mad at you if you don't learn the lesson. We take the example of fire. We can use fire to warm our hands. We can use fire to read a book. We can use fire to cook a meal. But if we sit down in the fire is not mad at us. We're being an idiot. So the question of how do we stop being an idiot is the basis for how we determine what abodes are necessary. So when a person is in resistance to the lesson, the first question you ask is the resistance as a result of a ancestral tendency to engage in negative behavior. That's the first question, Am I violent towards my wife because my father was violent towards his wife? Am I violent towards my children because my father was violent to me? The first question is the source of the problem ancestral? If you determine that it's ancestral, then you make an offering, adimu, to the ancestors and say, please break this hex, break this addictive behavior, break this chain of dysfunction, break this chain of negativity. You have to call it and ask for it to be broken and appeal to the collective spirit of the ancestors to assist you in the process of letting go of the EB that causes you to react in a negative way to any situation that comes based on negative things you've learned from your family lineage. That's the first aspect of abode. The second aspect would be Ori. In other words, if you're continually blaming the devil for your problems, if you're continually blaming others, if you're continually hexing yourself, if you're continually saying this is my fault when it's not, if you're continually afraid that the Orishas are mad at you, those negative thoughts are going to form they're going to take up physical space in your aura, and so they need to be cleaned away. So we clean away the physical aspect of that self-hexing through the use of a head cleaning, of a bath, through black soap, with cleaning with herbs. That's the second aspect. But when you do that, when you clean away a hex, you start by making an offering to the ancestors, dealing with the source of the self-hexing, and then you move from that to the idea of cleaning away negativity. Now, if you've done that and there's still a problem, then you're not understanding something clearly. And we make an offering, either blood or adimu, to the Orishas to ask them not to stop being mad at it. We make an offering not to make a sacrifice. We make an offering not to appease some angry God that's upset about stuff that we can't comprehend. We make an offering to the Orishas to ask them to give us guidance. And so the last form of E-Ray is to Ifa. Typically that involves a four-legged animal. That offering is to feed the egg bay that comes to pray for you. If you have 20 people in your community who are Ifa priests that come to your house and say you're no longer sick, guess what? You're no longer sick. And in exchange for that prayer, in exchange for them holding that positive vision of who you are and where you're heading, it's traditional in Yoruba culture to feed those people. And feeding people goat is a big deal. It's Christmas, birthday, New Year's, and 4th of July all mixed into one. So when we determining what rituals need to be done, it's all based on the question, how do we break through the resistance of learning the lesson? How do we break through the resistance of seeing the value of Iwa Pwele? How do we break through the resistance of doing the right thing no matter what? And the offering process is always accumulative. In books, the long list of offerings is usually for Ire Ifa, but if it's Ire Egun, you give food to the Egun. If it's Ire Ori, you give food to the Egun and clean the Ori. If it's Ire Orisha, you give food to the Egun, you clean the Ori, and you feed the Orisha. If it's Ire Ifa, you clean the Ori, you feed the Egun, Orisha, and you feed the elders of the community who are praying on your behalf.
Ok, entendido. La siguiente pregunta, Baba Falokun, a continuación va a ir más enfocada directamente a los sacerdotes. Baba Falokun, ¿qué habilidades consideras psicológicas humanas fundamentales para un sacerdote al momento de guiar y escuchar a un consultante?
Yeah, okay, so here's the first point. I have never in Africa, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I have never seen divination done with one diviner. It's always done with at least a dozen diviners. And I've never seen divination done for a woman without Iaz present to help with the divination. So there's a mistaken idea that Awos need to be experts on everything. That is not true at all. It's our job as Awos to know who the experts are in the community. Ifa says that any problem you fix in your life is medicine for someone else, meaning the fundamental we teach is by role modeling correct behavior with the voice of authority, meaning the voice of someone who's worked through a particular problem. So if someone comes to me and they have a problem with alcoholism, I refer them to AA. I've never had a problem with alcoholism. I have no medicine for that. I don't know how to fix it. I'm useless in that regard. That doesn't make me a bad Awo, because my only job is to know who in the community can fix it. You know, there's a huge problem in the United States of women who are the victims of sexual abuse. Any woman that's been sexually abused by a man will only be healed by a woman effectively, and will only be healed by a woman who's healed that issue in herself and who can talk about what it takes based on personal experience. There's no way I'll ever have that experience at all. There's nothing I can do to get that experience. There's nothing I can do that'll make me an expert in that particular problem. So, we have what I consider to be a non-Ifa idea that Ifa priests are all-knowing. Everything they say is the word of God. You've got to obey everything they tell you to do, and you have to follow all their guidance. None of that is true. None of that. None of that. None of that. Divination is a communal problem-solving process. And the divination isn't over until you fix the problem. So if somebody comes to you and you give them help and they still have the problem, that divination is still open. You still got work to do. You still have offerings to make. You still have experts you need to bring to the mat who can help give you guidance. You still need to explore what it is that is causing the resistance to the change and the elevation and the healing. You know, if a woman comes to you who's been the victim of intense sexual abuse, it takes 2 or 3 years to heal that. And so consequently, the divination you do for that person remains open for 2 or 3 years. And they come to you with the escorted by the elder mothers who are helping heal the problem to get an update on their progress. And you get the update by marking the original Odu. You don't have to throw again. You already know what the problem is. You already know what the solution is. The question at that point becomes, how much progress have I made? Where am I stuck? What do I need to do to break through where I'm stuck today to get to the bigger end game of making sure this person is completely healed? This idea of strutting around and all I have to do is sprinkle juju dust on your head and the problem will go away, that is total, complete nonsense. You know, anybody who sells that idea is deluding themselves if they think they're a diviner, and anybody who believes that idea is unwilling to take responsibility for their own problems.
Baba Falokun, muy buena respuesta me ha dado usted a la pregunta. Esto es un tema bastante controversial porque como usted lo ha nombrado, en la diáspora afrocubana, en Occidente, se busca que un babalao llegue a ser lo totalmente entrenado o lo totalmente completo como para reunir todas las cualidades de un sacerdote. En general, todo en uno. Que sepa hacer la consulta, el dafá, que sepa hacer el borí, que sepa hacer el borirú, que sepa hacer todos los procesos de iniciación, que sea director de ceremonia. Entonces, Baba está explicando que el ejemplo del alcoholismo, que como él nunca ha sufrido de alcoholismo, él no sabe la medicina para eso. Y él como sacerdote sabe que hay un problema de alcoholismo, porque él ha dado con el problema, pero tiene que buscar el apoyo dentro de su esbe, de su familia religiosa, los que están a la hora de una divinación, porque él no la hace solo, otras opiniones al respecto. Por lo menos particularmente pienso que si han existido fenómenos como sacerdotes en la diáspora afrocubana, se pueden contar con los dedos de la mano derecha. Personas que han sido completas en todo. Entonces, esto es un consejo para todos, que tengamos claro que debemos encontrarnos como sacerdotes y saber en qué área nos debemos especializar cada uno. ¿Qué H tenemos? Otorgado por los Oldumares. Entonces, Baba Falokun, con la siguiente pregunta que le voy a hablar es: ¿en qué aspecto crees que la psicología moderna y la sabiduría de Ifa se complementan y en cuáles difieren fundamentalmente?
The psychology of Ifa, as is understood and practiced in West Africa, is the same as what they call the Egyptian therapeutic in Egypt. It's a group of priests who were engaged in healing work. And the Egyptian therapeutic is also known as the Essenes in Jewish culture. Sigmund Freud, who was the father of Western psychology, right, was also a friend of my grandfather's. And my grandfather helped him understand what I'm about to say. Freud learned the fundamental techniques of psychology by studying the Essenean traditions of Jewish culture and the therapeutic traditions of Egyptian culture. Which means Ifa is the root of psychology. Absolutely, historically, unequivocally, and to say anything differently is to be mistaken in your perception of that evolution. There are books written based on quoting me on that premise that are used in academia that establish the origins of psychotherapy in West African priesthood and the East African priesthood, and show the origins of the idea, for example, of the conscious, the unconscious, and the subconscious, and the collective unconscious. So conscious is Ori, The unconscious is Ori y Èṣù, and the collective unconscious is Ipo and Ri. Those ideas existed for thousands of years before they ever showed up in Western academia. And the fact that Western academia never gives Africa credit for that is a detriment to their own credibility, in my opinion. But the point is this, where Western psychology falls apart and is ineffective and does not deal with some of the issues that Ifa has the tools to deal with, is that Western psychology does not turn to spirit for guidance. And to the extent they don't do that is the extent to which they're shooting themselves in the foot, they're limiting their access to solutions, and they're not providing a healing context in the real world. I'll show you. There's the second rant in one night. Carl Jung, who was Freud's first student, broke with Freud over this issue. Jung believed that you could communicate with spirit. Jung believed that based on his study with African shamans and First Nation shamans. Came to see Freud, and Jung told Freud, you need to stop having an affair with your wife's sister because you're going to bring discredit to the whole field of psychology. And Freud said, you can't possibly know that I'm doing that. And Jung said, yes, I can. Freud said, how? Jung said, through psychic intuition and communicate with spirit. Freud said, I don't believe that's possible. Jung said, I'll prove it's possible. Your desk is going to split in half against the grain right now. And it did. And as a result of that moment that totally freaked Freud out, Jung and Freud never spoke to each other again. But before that happened, my grandfather, who was a part of the Priory of Zion, which was a group that was protecting some of the information brought to Europe by the Knights Templars in the 12th century, my grandfather gave Jung access to Essene documents that Freud used to develop his theories of psychoanalysis. So they're connected. You know, I really believe that one of the important issues in 2025, if we're going to get through this mess that we've gotten in with immature people running the world, one of the things we need to do is acknowledge that we're all children of Africa, and that Africa is the birthplace of science, religion, metaphysics, physics, and psychology. If we don't do that, we're just in profound state of self-denial, actually. The name Adalbert Phineas means guardian of the eternal flame in Solomon's temple.
Awo Falokun, la siguiente pregunta que quiero hacerle se maneja también, no a nivel psicológico dentro de lo que es la práctica afrocubana, pero sí el término de la sombra. ¿Qué es para usted la sombra hablemos del psicoanálisis, y cómo se expresaría la sombra en Ifa según su punto de vista?
Yes, right. Sure. Yeah, a good question. Philosophy speaks very directly about the shadow, and in Yoruba the word is ojiji. Ojiji means shadow. Ojiji gives birth to Elenini. So let's take it. Shadow. Our shadow, we all know what our physical shadow is, right? But the shadow from a psychological point of view is darkness created by one who does not own the darkness. That's what I mean by the first step in expanding your consciousness involves not blaming anybody for anything and taking full responsibility for all your issues. If you created a problem in the world and you blame someone else, you are invoking your shadow, not your higher self. And so I wanted to talk about that because the second rule of Iwa Pele is take nothing personally. So how does that relate to the issue of shadow? When you go to a diviner, I guarantee it's going to sound like I'm exaggerating, but when a person comes to me for divination and I say, you can't blame someone else, this is your responsibility, this is for you to fix, this is the source of the problem, you're 100% in control of shifting the outcome, and all you have to do is expand your consciousness and change your behavior. If they resist that, that's called EB. When a person is in EB, the very first thing they do is reject the information from the diviner, tell the diviner they don't know what they're talking about, and then go back out in the world trying to get people to share their belief that the diviner is an idiot, or worse. So in order to deal with that, you can't take anything personally. The majority of people that come to me get upset at what I have to say, you know. They call me all kinds of names. I can't tell you how many elays have been started around the world based on the idea that I don't know what I'm talking about. That is not a good foundation for creating an elay. That's why we have the cultural admonition around not denigrating elders. You know, in African culture, it's understood that if somebody's denigrating their elder, they're in resistance to a message given to them by the elder. People in the diaspora do not understand that at all. So that any criticism of me gets lots of play, or criticism of you or Baba, Jason, whoever. You know, once people start criticizing, that spirals and gets lots of support. And the reason it gets lots of support is based on social conditioning. That phenomena is the basis of every reality TV show ever made in the last 30 years. You know, and you cannot, hear me, you cannot practice Ifa until you let go of the idea of blaming others for your problems. Anytime you're blaming others for the problems, you're standing in your shadow. And when you stand in your shadow, you create Elenini. And what an Elenini is a non-existent negative spirit generated by your consciousness, which is the Ifa equivalent of the devil made me do it. And the problem with Elenini is, anytime you try and clean it or dispel it or identify it as a projection, the person who's created the Elenini will make the Elenini stronger, more ferocious, and more negative. And if they keep doing that on an ongoing basis, it eventually leads to what Ifa calls Ori Baruku, which is a harsh way of saying crazy. You know, Ori Baruku means consciousness that brings death. So the sequence is Ojiji, shadow, Elenini, fake demon, and Ori Baruku, consciousness that is self-destructive. And so that's a real common phenomena that's barely understood, recognized, or dealt with in any effective way. And it's one of the reasons why Ifa is a communal collective practice. If you're part of a community that won't give any play to your shadow, won't take seriously your conjured demon, and who refuses to accept your negativity, there's no place to put those things. The whole community is conspiring to make you healthy. And so there's a certain need to trust the community for that process to be effective.
Baba Falokun, le quiero comentar algo. y quisiera que me respondiera lo siguiente. Según su comprensión de Ifa, ¿la persona nace con una naturaleza definida o se va formando a lo largo de la vida? Es decir, Baba, ¿qué tiene más peso en la conformación del ser? ¿La herencia espiritual o genética o la crianza, la educación y las experiencias vividas? Me pregunto yo, ¿nacemos con un destino ya trazado o como una hoja en blanco?
Some people say Iwa Re Re means good character. That's not correct. That is not what Iwa Re Re means. When you're born Iwa Re Re, the English equivalent would be born in innocence. Born in innocence, and also Iwa Re Re represents Ile Ife Orum Waye, meaning the unconditional of heaven comes to earth in a newborn child who we call Omo Re Re. So a newborn child during the naming ceremony touches their feet to Ije Ogbe, and Ije Ogbe represents perfect alignment with the head and the heart, perfect alignment with destiny, perfect alignment with the whole point of creation. The point of creation is to bring unconditional love from heaven to earth. And when we brought all the unconditional love of heaven to earth, then earth becomes heaven, and we transfer that love back to earth at a higher level of consciousness. So in simple terms, we are the eyes of the Creator looking back at itself. That's called Iwa Re Re. What happens is that we forget our divine nature as we grow, as we move in the world, as we're influenced by negative thoughts, negative people. So Iwa Re Re starts to become Ori Baruku, and Ori Baruku returns to Ori Re Re through the process of Iwa Pele. So Iwa Pele is the spiritual discipline that we embrace to remember who we were when we came to earth. And so part of that remembering includes a destiny, and according to Ifa, everybody's destiny is rooted in removing the family curses from their own ancestral bloodline. Our first obligation as human beings is to elevate the family, put the family in alignment with Earth, and to make sure the Earth is a healthy place to come to when we reincarnate. And so we use divination to help us remember what was forgotten when we come to Earth. In Odu Ifa, that the birth process is called the journey from the blue river to the red river. In other words, blood is blue in the body and becomes red when blood hits the atmosphere of the physical world. And so in that moment of the the blue water is becoming red water, we sometimes forget our destiny. And, there's a really interesting conversation about that from Terrence Howard, who said while he was in the womb, his higher self woke him up and said, "You've got an important destiny. Here's what it is. I do not want you to forget it, and I do not want you to waste any time trying to remember." And so the thing that his higher self told him while he was in the womb is the science that he's currently teaching. And it's astonishing, and it's deeply, deeply, deeply rooted in the symbolism of liturgical Yoruba. Let me show you how profound Ifa is by breaking down the elision of Iwa Re Re, okay? The word Wa in Yoruba means to come. Iwa is a reference to the coming, capital T, capital C, the coming from heaven to earth. Re Re is the elision of Ire Ire. When you repeat a word in Yoruba, you're talking about the historical metaphysical source of that concept. So Iwa Re Re means the first coming of goodness from heaven to earth. And so Iwa Rere is the process, Omo Rere is the result. Those who experience Iwa Rere become Omo Rere. Omo meaning child. So the child of the original spark of goodness, or Iwa Pele, in creation. Now that's an amazing concept, you know. So the idea of original sin doesn't exist. God does not hate us. Some people say, well, what about the bad Oris? Very, very, very rare, and usually the result of family dysfunction, and not a principle of divine manifestation.
Baba Falokun, desde una perspectiva psicológica y simbólica, ¿cómo se podrían comprender las funciones de Ori y Èṣù dentro de la mente humana? ¿Qué aspectos del pensamiento, la conciencia o el comportamiento representan cada uno dentro del marco filosófico de Ifa?
Right. Another good question. So, Èṣù Odara means the messenger of the spirit that stands up with taboo is what it means. All right, and so messenger, we know messenger is the ability of humans to speak to spirit and spirit to speak to humans. Spirit that divides taboo. Spirit is the letter O. Da means to stand up, to divide but when you divide something, you take a closer look at it, you open it, you examine it. Ra is taboo, but it's not taboo as commonly understood in diaspora as restriction. Taboo is guidance about what behavior will bring you good fortune and what behavior won't. So the name Èṣù Odara, the messenger of the spirit of the division of taboo, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But in more practical terms, what that name means is you can only travel so far away from who you essentially are before you run into yourself. So those people that are rooted in greed instead of unconditional love, those people who need to control others rather than support others, those people that need to denigrate others rather than be supportive of others, all that negativity reaches what I would call a boiling point where it can no longer sustain itself, where the person who's engaged in those behaviors has what's called an emotional breakdown from a psychological point of view, which I would call an emotional breakthrough. You know, people come to divination usually when they're frustrated because they keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a better result, which never happens because they're stuck in a pattern, right? So Èṣù Odara has the function of breaking the rigidity of those patterns. And Ifa teaches that if you're stuck in a pattern, doing something different is always going to bring you closer to the truth, even if what you do that is different is not effective to fix the problem completely. So Èṣù is to trick us into going into the world and learning from experience. And so the whole process of spiritual growth is what what's his name? Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is predicated on a moment of disruption in normal life, Èṣù pushing you to encounter yourself, and in that moment, you feeling the need to go into the world to figure out what's really true. And once you figure that out and solve an internal problem, you bring that wisdom back to your community. It's called a boon or a gift or a treasure. So Èṣù is the pivotal point in which complacency turns into curiosity. Okay. With Ori, yeah, okay. So Ori is is really the container through which that journey takes place. In other words, when Odu speaks about Orunmila marrying Iwa, that's not a marriage in the physical sense of a man finding a woman. That's not what the Odu is talking about at all. Orunmila marrying Iwa is talking about the Ori moving towards integration, towards male and female balance, towards a perfect balance between forces of expansion and contraction. So every step along the hero's journey, every step towards enlightenment goes through 4 phases. Life, just normal life. Death, something that happens that makes you no longer able to be the person you once were. Transformation, the process of sorting out a better way to do things, and then OD, rebirth. And we're constantly going through those 4 stages, and it's our Ori that becomes the library, let's say, for evaluating those experiences, and it becomes the source of inspiration for continuing that journey in a courageous way.
Awo Falokun Fatunmbi, de nuevo, mil gracias. Que Olodumare lo siga bendiciendo y siempre esté con nosotros, trayéndonos sus sabias palabras, sus consejos y sus enseñanzas. A todos ustedes, gracias por acompañarnos en este viaje entre dimensiones, donde la voz de Ifa nos guía y la sabiduría ancestral nos transforma. Recuerda, cada paso consciente, cada acto con buen carácter es parte de tu evolución espiritual. Amigo, si este espacio resonó contigo, compártelo, suscríbete, dale click a la campanita, like, y acompáñanos en nuestros próximos episodios de Dimensionar, el podcast de la Fraternidad Ifa de las Américas.
And here's your next soundbite. Hasta luego.
Si quiere comunicar con Awo Falokun, puede escribir a mí en jasonaguila16@gmail.com. También por el mismo nombre y apellido en Facebook y Instagram también me puede encontrar y escribirme a mí, y también en la página de Facebook que es Egbe Iwapuele, que va a estar en la descripción abajo. Esa es la comunidad en Facebook que puede ver todos los eventos que estamos teniendo, y como la comunidad en este podcast es en español, me puede comunicar conmigo y podemos tener una llamada con Awo Falokun y echar para adelante.
Fraternidad Ifa de las Américas, podcast dimensional.
Si quiere.